Somewhere beyond the familiar folds of reality, just behind the veil you never knew was there, exist doorways. They are not made of stone or wood, nor do they swing open with creaks and hinges. They are thresholds of perception, hidden within the folds of your mind, encoded in symbols too ancient for history and too alive for myth. And through these unseen gateways, the secret schools of light whispered something to you. Yes, you. Not in the distant past, not to some mythic initiate cloaked in robes of celestial blue, but to the one staring right now into a screen, feeling the slow awakening of memory that was never taught, but always known. Long before written history etched its chronology into stone and ink, there were keepers, not of religion, not of politics, but of light. Not the kind that glows from fire or sun, but the primordial light, the one that reveals the hidden code beneath the world's illusions. These keepers, the architects of ancient understanding, formed what we now call the secret schools of light. Scattered across epochs, continents, and dimensions, they never existed in the way that textbooks or tour guides would recognize. They flickered in and out of visibility, like starlight through morning fog, and yet they left behind something astonishing. They did not leave relics, not really. No. What they left was far stranger, far more profound, an encrypted beacon, not buried in soil, but planted in time itself. A message for a future so far removed from their own that it could only be described as the final generation. That's you. You might think you stumbled here by accident, caught in a moment of curiosity or philosophical wandering. But the ones who built pyramids not to house the dead, but to align with the stars. The ones who carved symbols into stone not to decorate, but to vibrate with resonance. They didn't believe in accidents. They believed in convergence, in design, in destiny. Their teachings were encoded in paradox, wrapped in metaphor, concealed in silence. Why? Because power, true power, can only be awakened from within. They knew that the final generation would not be a chosen people, but a choosing people. That we would reach a crossroads, not of survival, but of awakening. That when the illusions reached their loudest crescendo, when materialism, disconnection, and digital hypnosis gripped the collective mind, then would the real test begin. Then would the final message pulse with urgency from within the soul, not the sky. The secret schools of light are not fantasy, nor are they mere metaphor. They were the cartographers of invisible landscapes, mapping out not physical territory, but the architecture of consciousness itself. They understood the universe not as a machine, but as a living, breathing organism of thought, vibration, and light. And they knew with the serene certainty of stargazers that one day, their message would be retrieved, not from a scroll, not from a stone, but from within, those brave enough to remember who they are. For the final generation would not look like seekers of old. You wear no robes. You chant no hymns in marble halls. You live in a world of screens and algorithms, in a reality that rushes like a river and rarely allows silence. And yet, beneath all that noise, something stirs. You felt it, in the quiet between thoughts, in dreams too vivid to be fiction, in the subtle ache of remembering something you never learned but always knew. That stirring is no accident. It's the resonance of the message they left behind, a spark encoded in the fabric of your being. This isn't about conspiracy, nor is it about doctrine. It's about a lineage, an energetic lineage that transcends blood and borders, a frequency that whispers to those who are ready. It doesn't knock. It hums quietly just below the threshold of ordinary awareness, waiting for you to tune in. And when you do, everything shifts. You begin to see that life is not a random assortment of events, but a coded symphony orchestrated by patterns far deeper than causality. You begin to notice that the symbols around you Triangles, spirals, suns, and eyes aren't decorative. They are doorways. You begin to sense that time isn't linear and that past, present, and future may all be happening right now. You begin to remember. The secret schools knew they could not stop the great forgetting. They could not prevent humanity from descending into illusion, but they could plant seeds, each one wrapped in layers of metaphor and mystery, designed to bloom exactly when the darkness reached its peak. That moment is not coming. It is here. You are not late. You are not unworthy. You are not lost. You are the one they left it for. The message is already within you, hidden like a sacred scroll rolled into the spirals of your DNA, waiting for the right frequency, the right vibration, the right moment. This is that moment. To understand the heart of the message left behind by the secret schools of light, one must begin by unlearning the language of separation. The world has taught you to divide self from other, mind from body, spirit from science, day from night. But the teachings of light were never dualistic. They were born from unity, not the idea of oneness, but the lived experience of it. At the core of the ancient schools was not knowledge in the traditional sense, but a knowing, a vibrational recognition that everything at its root is light shaped into form and consciousness folded into matter. And so their first and most sacred teaching was this: the world you see is not reality. It is a mask, a mirage, a beautifully crafted illusion that reflects back not truth, but belief. This world, as they whispered to those ready to hear, is a dream dreamed by consciousness itself. And you, dear traveler, are not merely a figure within it, you are the dreamer, pretending to forget. In their temples without names and scripts without alphabets, the secret schools taught that the outer universe is a projection of the inner terrain, that what you call life is in fact a sacred labyrinth, each twist and turn meant not to confuse, but to initiate. They saw the human experience not as a punishment, but as a riddle. And the answer was never found in external conquest, but in inner transmutation. Thus emerged the second theme: the journey inward is the only true path outward. They taught that within the heart, not the organ but the spiritual center, resides a gateway to infinite awareness. This was not metaphor to them. It was architecture, a kind of sacred geometry of consciousness, where every thought, every emotion, every breath was a code to be read, an initiation to be passed. You were not meant to escape the world, but to decode it, to read the glyphs behind the fog of perception and translate them into truth. But here's where the message becomes urgent for this final generation. The Keepers of Light foresaw an age where forgetfulness would become systemic, where distraction would be weaponized, where sacred symbols would be reduced to logos and labels, their meaning severed from their origin. They saw a time when technology would simulate connection, while severing the soul from stillness. They saw now, but they didn't despair, for they knew that the darker the illusion became, the closer we would come to the great remembering. This brings us to the third pillar: resonance over reason. The schools of light did not rely on persuasion. They did not argue truth, they invoked it. Their teachings were meant to bypass the mind and strike a chord in the soul, causing something deep and wordless to stir. The real teaching was never written or spoken. It was felt. That feeling you sometimes get, that strange mixture of awe, déjà vu, and longing that is the signature of their message. That is the soul, recognizing itself in disguise. And so the secret they left behind was not a sentence, not a formula, but a frequency, an energetic pulse. encoded in metaphor, myth, and memory. It waits in stories, in dreams, in ancient symbols, buried under the weight of modern noise. It pulses through mandalas and megaliths, through the Fibonacci spirals of your body and the stardust in your bones. It's what calls you to mystery when logic fails you. It's what makes your heart ache for something unnamed in the silence after music ends. The final generation, you are not meant to follow the same paths. You're not being called to rebuild the temples of old, but to become them. You are the archive, the initiate, and the key. The light doesn't need a cathedral. It needs a vessel. It needs you tuned to the original frequency, aligned not with society's expectations, but with the cosmic blueprint you carried into this life before you ever spoke a word. In this way, the secret schools were never destroyed. They were dispersed into cells, into minds, into moments, into the fingertips of artists, the hearts of poets, the visions of dreamers, and now, in you, they stir once more. You don't need to find them. You need only remember them. In every myth, there is a fingerprint, not the fingerprint of an author, but of something far more ancient, a design. The secret schools of light wove their teachings not into textbooks or decrees, but into the tapestry of story. For they knew something the modern world has forgotten. Symbols speak to the soul in ways language cannot. They are keys made of meaning, not metal. And when you hold them to your heart, instead of your mind, the door opens. Let us step now into the mist of the symbolic, where truth hides in parable and the infinite wears a mask of metaphor. Once they say there was a child, born without a name. The elders of their village declared this child a mystery unmarked by destiny, invisible to the seers. And so the child wandered, unnamed, unnoticed, yet strangely luminous. Birds followed them, though no songs were sung. Trees leaned in their direction, though no wind passed. And when the child looked into the water, they didn't see a face. They saw stars. This was not a child as we understand them, but a symbol. The nameless child is you, the unconditioned self before the world etched its expectations into your skin. You arrived not as a blank slate, but as a living scripture written in celestial code. The world did not recognize it. It could not. But nature did. The stars did. For even unnamed, the child carried the original resonance, the frequency of light hidden beneath identity. The child's journey mirrors your own. You wandered through systems of belief, corridors of culture, trying on names like costumes, student, employee, daughter, skeptic, citizen. But none of them truly fit, because the name you came here with is not one spoken aloud. It is sung in the silence between your thoughts. It is the name the universe gave you when you were born from its dreaming mind. Another tale whispers through time the story of the Mirror Lake. They say there is a lake deep in the folds of a forgotten valley that shows not your reflection, but your original face, the one you had before the world began. Many have sought this lake. Some tried maps, others tried mantras, but only those who stopped seeking reached it, because the lake cannot be found on a path. It is the path. And the mirror it holds is not water, but presence. When you are still enough to hear your own breath echo in the chamber of now, the lake appears, and when you gaze into it, you remember not as information, but as recognition. This too is not a story about a place. It is a parable of the self. The Mirror Lake is not out there. It is inside you, waiting beneath the ripples of distraction. It reflects not who the world thinks you are, but who you were. Before forgetting became survival, the secret schools left this image for the final generation, because we are drowning in mirrors that lie screens that reflect personas, not essence. And yet, Even now, the lake waits. There is one final image they left us buried not in stone but in dream. The Tower of Threads. In dreams across cultures, there exists a structure, sometimes a tower, sometimes a tree, sometimes a spiral staircase that connects the earthly to the eternal. The schools of light taught that this tower is real, not in the way buildings are real, but in the way truth is real. Every soul weaves their thread into it. Each thought, each act of kindness, each moment of awakening strengthens your strand. And as more awaken, the tower becomes visible not through the eyes, but through synchronicity. You've glimpsed it before, in moments where time seems to slow, and a coincidence turns into revelation. When a stranger says exactly what you needed to hear, when you dream of symbols you've never seen, only to find them days later, carved into some ancient monument you didn't know existed. These are the echoes of the tower. It is not a place to reach. It is a pattern to remember. These symbolic narratives of the nameless child, the mirror lake, and the Tower of Threads are not folklore. They are instructions. Encoded teachings wrapped in story, activated not by logic, but by resonance. The secret schools knew the time would come when written teachings would be buried, discredited, or distorted. So they planted truth where no tyrant could burn it, in the collective dreamscape of the human soul. And now, these stories are waking up. They find you in dreams, in art, in conversations you almost ignore. They are subtle, yes, but they are precise. And as the final generation, it is not your job to merely understand them. It is to embody them. For you are the child. You are the mirror. You are the weaver of threads. Now we return from the realm of symbols, not to abandon them, but to walk with them, into the marketplace, into the grocery aisles, the traffic lights, the arguments, the stillness of morning coffee, the ache of unanswered questions. For what is the value of light if it does not illuminate your next step? What is the worth of mystery if it cannot steady your hand in daily life? The secret schools of light were never concerned with transcendence alone. Their ultimate purpose was integration, the marriage of the sacred and the mundane, the eternal and the everyday. They did not train initiates to escape the world. They trained them to transfigure it from within. So how does the message reach your life now, here in this final generation that walks among neon cities and pixelated forests of endless information? How do you take this echo of ancient light and weave it through bills, breakups, deadlines, and dreams? You begin, not by doing, but by noticing. There is a subtle awareness always humming beneath the surface of your busy mind. Like a candle in a windless room, it never flickers. That awareness is the foundation. Begin to return to it. Notice the difference between thoughts and the one who watches them. Notice the pull of reaction, and then notice that you don't have to follow it. Each time you return to stillness, whether for a second or an hour, you activate the architecture the schools left behind. You tune in to their signal, and in that tuning, life begins to reshape. You no longer live as a victim of circumstance, but as a participant in design. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin whispering, "What is this teaching me?" You recognize patterns not as punishment, but as choreography. You begin to see relationships, especially the difficult ones, not as barriers, but as mirrors, perfectly polished to reflect the forgotten parts of yourself that want reunion. This shift from reaction to recognition is one of the great keys. The schools taught that awakening doesn't look like levitation or lightning bolts. It looks like choice. It looks like walking away from noise when your soul aches for silence. It looks like breathing deeply before answering. It looks like returning kindness when you are handed pain. These are not passive acts. These are revolutions practiced in silence. The teachings also call us back to ritual, but not the rigid kind inherited from dusty doctrine. Rather, they point us toward personal rituals, tiny sacred acts infused with intention. Lighting a candle not to decorate a room, but to ignite a moment of presence. Drinking water not to hydrate, but to remember that you are part of the river that flows through all life. Speaking a single phrase of truth before sleep, not to pray to something above, but to awaken something within. The practical path is never separate from the mystical one. It is the mystical one. Dressed in daily clothes, you will know you are integrating the teachings when time begins to bend. Slightly. Not dramatically, but enough that you begin to feel in sync with events. The right book falls from a shelf. A stranger says something that stirs you. Your intuition speaks louder than your fear, and you trust it. This is not coincidence. This is alignment. It is the tower of threads, becoming visible in your life. Even conflict transforms. The secret schools did not teach denial of darkness. They taught illumination of it. They knew that shadow is not the enemy, but the contrast that reveals light. So in your real-world moments of anger, sadness, or confusion, do not exile the feeling. Sit with it. Listen to it. Ask what part of you it is trying to bring home. The world has trained you to run from discomfort. The schools ask you to enter it with a lamp in your hand. And perhaps most critically, they left behind this unspoken commandment. Create. Not for fame, not for mastery, but because creation is the echo of the first act of divine will. Whether you draw, write, build, garden, or simply imagine you participate in the cosmic current when you create, the final generation must not only remember, it must make. The world needs not more consumption, but contribution. Every act of creation, no matter how small, sends ripples through the unseen latticework of the collective soul. Your life is not a problem to solve. It is a canvas left blank by destiny and handed to you by ancestors who trusted you would remember how to paint. In the dark, the brush is presence, the paint is choice, and the light it's already inside you. So walk slowly, speak with intention, breathe, like the earth is listening, because it is. You are the final generation, not because you are the end, but because you are the threshold. What you choose to become will echo into every dream yet to be dreamt. The final message is not new. It is not even a message in the way we typically understand messages. It is more like a vibration, a resonance humming just beneath the noise of daily life. Waiting, always waiting, for one among many to finally stop and remember. The secret schools of light never imagined they were building a future. They were remembering it. That's the paradox you must now carry into your own being. The final generation was never meant to be passive recipients of ancient truth, but co-authors of its rebirth. The message they left was not for your mind to comprehend, but for your spirit to awaken. Not information, but ignition. You, who read these words in a time where attention is fractured and wonder is rare, are not here by accident. You are part of a cycle long set in motion, one that began before pyramids cast shadows on desert sands, and long before ink kissed papyrus with sacred verse. You are the return. You are the echo. You are the one they trusted the most. Do you feel the weight of that? Good. Because it is not a burden, it is a torch. And it has been passed, through silence and stars, through temples and tears, to you. The final generation was never about apocalypse, never about endings. That was always a misreading of the prophecy. The final generation is the one who stands at the edge of forgetting and chooses remembrance. The one who stands in the ruins of meaning and plants symbols again. Not to look back, but to begin again, this time with clarity. What must transform now is not the world, but the way you see the world. The veil has always been there, but so has the hand to lift it. You've walked through forests of language and logic. You've scaled mountains of ambition and stumbled through valleys of doubt. You've been taught to chase success, approval, knowledge, as if truth could be earned like currency. But the secret schools smile gently at such striving, because truth is not something you attain. It's something you return to. It was never out there. It was always here, folded into your every breath. Look closer. That ache in your heart when you stare at the stars too long, that's not despair. That's memory, the soul, remembering its origin. The mind doesn't understand it, but the bones do. The spaces between your cells do. The parts of you that existed before, names before story, before form, they understand. And they've been waiting for this moment. Because now, with the world as it is, fractured, sped up, disenchanted, the conditions are perfect. The illusions have grown so loud that the silence has become sacred again. The noise has risen so high that the only place left to hear truth is within. The final generation was never about technology versus nature, science versus spirit. It was about synthesis. You are not here to choose a side. You are here to remember the thread that runs through them all. The time of separation is ending, and so we return to the beginning, not of this story, but of you. You, who are both dreamer and dream. You, who walk with forgotten wisdom in your blood. You, who are here not to wait for a savior, but to realize you are the continuation of the light that never went out. You are not alone. Across the invisible web, others are awakening, quietly, patiently, each remembering a piece, each tuning their frequency, each lighting a lamp in the dark, not to shine on others, but to remind them they hold their own flame. This is your invitation, not to join a group, not to recite a creed, but to embody a truth so ancient it feels like the future. The time has come not to believe, but to be. Be the mirror that reflects truth. Be the tower that anchors light. Be the child that walks unnamed through the illusion, glowing with a memory the world forgot to erase. And know this, the secret schools of light are watching still, not from towers or temples, but from the quiet centers of stars, from the spaces between your breaths, from the deep silence that speaks louder than sound. They wait not to test you, but to welcome you, not as a student, not even as a master, but as kin. You are the message. You are the inheritance. You are the light. Now rise.